In 1999, the American Film Institute named the 50 greatest screen legends of all time. 25 men, 25 women. The faces that built Hollywood. Tonight, we're going to visit all 50 of their graves. Some rest beneath grand monuments. Some lie in quiet corners no one visits anymore. And a few have no grave at all. Let's begin, one legend at a time. We begin with the man AFI ranked the greatest male screen legend of all time. Humphrey Bogart was born in New York City in 1899, and after years of forgettable stage roles, he found the tough, world-weary persona that made him immortal in The Petrified Forest, then The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, and The African Queen, for which he won his Academy Award. He married 4 times, the last to Lauren Bacall, 25 years his junior, in one of Hollywood's great love stories. He died of esophageal cancer in 1957, at 57, telling Bacall as she left the house, "Goodbye, kid, hurry back." He was cremated, and his ashes rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Garden of Memory, a gated area accessible only to those with a pass. Bacall placed a small gold whistle in the urn, a token from their first film together. So the greatest screen legend of them all, the definition of Hollywood cool, rests behind a locked gate that most of his admirers can never enter, in a quiet garden that the crowds who love his films will never see. Cary Grant was the effortless embodiment of charm, wit, and elegance, the man every other leading man wanted to be. He was born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, in 1904, into genuine poverty and a shattered home. His mother was placed in an institution when he was a boy, and he was told she was dead. He ran away to join an acrobatic troupe, came to America, and reinvented himself so completely that he once said even he wanted to be Cary Grant. Notorious, His Girl Friday, To Catch a Thief, North by Northwest. He made it all look easy. He retired early to enjoy his life and his daughter. And he died in 1986, at 82, after being stricken before a performance in Davenport, Iowa. And here is the surprise. Cary Grant has no grave. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered, quietly, by his family. There is no monument, no stone, no place to visit. The most elegant man in the history of film left no forwarding address at all. James Stewart was the everyman conscience of American cinema, the tall, halting, decent figure who made goodness compelling. He was born in Indiana, Pennsylvania, in 1908, the son of a hardware store owner, and he brought a small-town sincerity to every role. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, Rear Window, Vertigo, The Philadelphia Story, for which he won his Oscar. He was also a genuine war hero, flying bombing missions over Germany and rising to brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve, one of the few stars whose real courage matched his screen image. He was married to the same woman, Gloria, for 45 years, and when she died, he was inconsolable. James Stewart died in 1997, at 89, of a blood clot, reportedly saying he was going to be with Gloria now. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. His grave is relatively modest for such a beloved figure, and while admirers do come, the man who embodied the American conscience rests more quietly than his enormous fame would suggest. Marlon Brando changed screen acting forever, bringing a raw, mumbling, animal naturalism that made everything before him look staged. He was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1924, to an alcoholic mother and a cold father, wounds that shaped his lifelong turbulence. A streetcar named Desire, on the waterfront, and The Godfather made him a legend, and he won 2 Academy Awards, famously refusing the second in protest over the treatment of Native Americans. His later life was marked by weight gain, eccentricity, reclusiveness, and terrible family tragedy, including his son's conviction for killing his daughter's boyfriend and his daughter's later suicide. Brando died in 2004, at 80, of respiratory failure. He was cremated. His ashes were divided, some scattered in Tahiti, where he had owned an island and found peace, and some scattered in Death Valley, alongside the ashes of his lifelong friend Wally Cox, which Brando had reportedly kept for years. The greatest actor of his generation has no single grave, his remains scattered between a Pacific paradise and an American desert. Fred Astaire was the greatest dancer the movies ever produced, a man who made impossible physical grace look weightless and easy. He was born Frederick Austerlitz in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1899 and danced in vaudeville with his sister Adele from early childhood. Paired with Ginger Rogers, he created some of the most sublime moments in film history. Top Hat, Swing Time, Shall We Dance? He was a perfectionist who rehearsed each number for weeks until it appeared effortless. He was devoted to his first wife, Phyllis, whose death in 1954 devastated him. Fred Astaire died in 1987 at 88 of pneumonia. He is buried at Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth, California, in the San Fernando Valley, in a modest plot. He had asked for no fuss and no crowds, and he got his wish. His grave is simple and quiet, and few of the tourists who love his films ever make the trip to the Valley Cemetery, where the greatest dancer in movie history lies beneath a plain marker. Henry Fonda was the embodiment of American integrity on screen, a lean, quiet presence who carried a moral weight few actors could match. He was born in Grand Island, Nebraska, in 1905, and brought a plain-spoken decency to The Grapes of Wrath, Young Mister, Lincoln, 12, Angry Men, and finally On Golden Pond, for which he won his only Academy Award, accepted on his behalf by his daughter Jane just before his death. His personal life was far more troubled than his steady screen image. He married 5 times and was emotionally distant from his children, a distance that shaped the public struggles of both Jane and Peter Fonda. Henry Fonda died in 1982 at 77 of heart disease, and in keeping with the modesty he valued, he left instructions that there be no funeral and no memorial service. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered, with no grave and no marker left behind. The man who symbolized American conscience chose to vanish completely, leaving only his films. Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood, the swaggering, mustached embodiment of masculine charm who ruled the box office for a generation. He was born in Cadiz, Ohio, in 1901, and worked his way up from oil fields and theater troupes to become the biggest male star of the 1930s. It Happened One Night won him an Oscar, and Gone with the Wind made him immortal as Rhett Butler. The great love of his life was Carole Lombard, whose death in a 1942 plane crash shattered him and drove him into the Army Air Forces during the war. Clark Gable died in 1960, at 59, of a heart attack, shortly after finishing The Misfits. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Great Mausoleum, beside Carole Lombard, reunited at last with the woman he had mourned for 18 years. But the Great Mausoleum is largely closed to the public, so the King of Hollywood rests behind marble walls that his admirers cannot pass, sealed away with his great love, unreachable. James Cagney was the electric, explosive, tough guy of the studio era, a former song and dance man who brought a coiled ferocity to the gangster roles that made him famous. He was born on the Lower East Side of New York in 1899, into hardship, and he never forgot his working-class roots. The Public Enemy made him a star, White Heat sealed his legend, and Yankee Doodle Dandy, in which he sang and danced as George M. Cohan, won him the Academy Award and revealed his true origins as a Hofer. He was, in private, a gentle, bookish man who left Hollywood whenever he could for his farm. James Cagney died in 1986, at 86, of a heart attack, at his farm in Stanfordville, New York. He is buried at Cemetery of the Gate of Heaven in Hawthorne, New York, in Westchester County, far from Hollywood. His grave, in a Catholic cemetery in the New York countryside he loved, is quiet and rarely visited, a world away from the studios where he once burned so brightly on screen. Spencer Tracy was considered by his peers the finest film actor of them all, a man whose naturalism was so complete that other actors could not see how he did it. He was born in Milwaukee in 1900 and won back-to-back Academy Awards for Captains Courageous and Boys Town, the first person ever to do so. A devout Catholic who would not divorce, he remained married to his wife Louise while conducting a 26-year love affair with Katharine Hepburn, hidden from the public. His final film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, was made when he was dying, with Hepburn caring for him throughout. Spencer Tracy died in 1967 at 67, of a heart attack, alone in his kitchen in the night, found by Hepburn moments later. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, beside his wife Louise. Katharine Hepburn, who loved him for a quarter century, is buried 3,000 miles away in Connecticut. His grave is quiet, and the woman who loved him most is not beside him, because that is how their bond had to remain, even in death. Charlie Chaplin created the most recognized figure in the history of film, the Little Tramp, and rose from the workhouses of London to become the most famous man on earth. He was born in London in 1889. Into desperate poverty, his mother institutionalized, his childhood a nightmare of hunger that shaped every film he made. The Kid, The Gold Rush, City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator. He was later exiled from America over his politics and his private life, and he settled in Switzerland. Charlie Chaplin died on Christmas Day, 1977, at 88, in his sleep. He was buried in the small village of Corsier-sur-Vevey, and then, 2 months later, his body was stolen from the grave by thieves demanding ransom. His widow refused, the men were caught, and his coffin was recovered from a nearby cornfield and reburied under concrete so it could never happen again. He rests now on the shore of Lake Geneva, far from Hollywood and London, in a grave that was once robbed, quiet at last. Gary Cooper was the strong, silent hero of American cinema, a man whose stillness and understatement spoke louder than any other actor's noise. He was born in Helena, Montana, in 1901, and brought an authentic Western reserve to Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Sergeant York, and High Noon, winning 2 Academy Awards for the latter two. His quiet yep and nope became the sound of American masculine understatement. He was a devout convert to Catholicism late in life, and he faced his death with great courage. Gary Cooper died in 1961, at 60 of cancer, just days after receiving an honorary Oscar that James Stewart accepted for him, weeping so openly that the world guessed Cooper was dying before it was announced. He is buried at Sacred Heart's Catholic Cemetery in Southampton, New York, on Long Island, having moved his final resting place east. His grave, marked by a massive boulder, brought from a Montauk beach, sits quietly in a Long Island churchyard. Far from the Western landscapes he made his own on screen. Gregory Peck was the very image of dignity and moral seriousness, the actor audiences trusted to embody decency and courage. He was born in La Jolla, California, in 1916, and brought a grave nobility to Gentleman's Agreement, Roman Holiday, and, most enduringly, To Kill a Mockingbird, in which his Atticus Finch won him the Academy Award and became a symbol of moral integrity for generations. He was a lifelong activist for liberal causes and a devoted family man in his later years, married to Veronique for nearly 50 years. Gregory Peck died in 2003 at 87, in his sleep, with Veronique at his side. He is entombed at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in downtown Los Angeles, in the mausoleum beneath the cathedral, a rare honor. His crypt is in a beautiful and solemn setting, but the mausoleum's limited public access means that most admirers of Atticus Finch will never stand before the resting place of the man who gave that character his soul. John Wayne was the towering icon of the American Western, the walk, the drawl, and the presence that defined rugged masculinity for half a century. He was born Marion Morrison in Winterset, Iowa, in 1907, and after years of B-Westerns, he became a legend in Stagecoach, The Searchers, and True Grit, which finally won him the Academy Award. He was a divisive political figure, and his image has been reconsidered in the decades since, but his stature as a screen presence is beyond dispute. John Wayne died in 1979, at 72, of stomach cancer, after a long and public battle that made him a spokesman for cancer awareness. He is buried at Pacific View Memorial Park in Corona del Mar, California, overlooking the ocean. For many years, his grave was deliberately left unmarked, at his family's wish, to protect it. A marker was eventually added. His grave, on a bluff above the Pacific, is quieter than one might expect for so towering a figure, and for decades, no stone marked where the Duke lay at all. Laurence Olivier was widely regarded as the greatest actor of the 20th century, the supreme interpreter of Shakespeare, and a titan of both stage and screen. He was born in Dorking, England in 1907, the son of a clergyman, and he brought a technical brilliance and commanding presence to Wuthering Heights, Rebecca, and his own celebrated films of Henry V, Hamlet, and Richard III. He won 2 Academy Awards and was made a life peer, becoming Lord Olivier. His stormy marriage to Vivien Leigh was one of the great tragic romances of the theater world. Laurence Olivier died in 1989 at 82 of kidney failure after years of illness. He was cremated, and in recognition of his supreme place in British culture, his ashes were interred in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey, among the greatest figures in English literary and artistic history. It is one of the highest honors his country could bestow. Yet within the vast, tourist-thronged abbey, the small stone marking the ashes of the greatest actor of the century is easily passed by the crowds who never notice it. Gene Kelly brought athletic, muscular joy to the movie musical, transforming dance into something powerful, populist, and distinctly American. He was born in Pittsburgh in 1912, and his choreography and performances in An American in Paris, On the Town, and above all Singin' in the Rain, redefined what a musical could be. His dance in the rain, splashing through puddles with pure delight, is one of the most beloved sequences ever filmed. He received an honorary Academy Award for his contributions to the art of the film musical. Behind the exuberance was a demanding perfectionist and a serious artist who fought to have dance taken seriously as cinema. Gene Kelly died in 1996, at 83, after a series of strokes. And in keeping with his wishes, there was no funeral and no memorial service at all. He was cremated, and his ashes were kept privately by his family, with no public grave and no marker. The man who gave the world some of its most joyful moments left no place for admirers to visit, only the films themselves, dancing forever. Orson Welles was the boy genius who made Citizen Kane at 25 and spent the rest of his life as both a legend and a cautionary tale. He was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 1915, a prodigy in every art he touched. His War of the Worlds radio broadcast panicked a nation, and Citizen Kane, which he directed, co-wrote, and starred in, is routinely called the greatest film ever made. But his refusal to bend to the studios left much of his later career a scattered wreck of unfinished projects and financial struggle. Orson Welles died in 1985 at 70, of a heart attack, working to the very end. He was cremated. In a fittingly strange final act, his ashes were taken to Spain and buried in a well beneath a stone floor on the rural estate of a retired bullfighter who had been his friend, near Ronda. The greatest director in American film rests in an old well on a Spanish farm, in a grave so obscure and so private that almost no admirer will ever find it. Kirk Douglas was the intense, dimpled, iron-jawed embodiment of Hollywood ambition and endurance, a ragman's son who clawed his way to the top and stayed there for 70 years. He was born Isur Danielovich in Amsterdam, New York, in 1916, to poor Russian Jewish immigrants, and he brought a ferocious energy to Champion, Lust for Life, Paths of Glory, and Spartacus, the film on which he famously broke the Hollywood blacklist by crediting screenwriter Dalton Trumbo. He survived a helicopter crash and a stroke, and lived to the age of 103, one of the last living links to the Golden Age. Kirk Douglas died in 2020 at 103. He was buried at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, the small, star-packed cemetery where Marilyn Monroe also rests. His grave is in that crowded celebrity ground, but the enormous crowds come for Monroe, and the resting place of the fierce, indestructible Spartacus is passed by most of the visitors who never realize the legend is there. James Dean became immortal by dying young, the emblem of restless, wounded youth after only 3 major films. He was born in Marion, Indiana, in 1931, and raised on a farm after his mother's early death, a loss that marked him deeply. East of Eden, rebel without a cause, and Giant established him instantly as the voice of a new, alienated generation, and 2 of the 3 were released after he was already dead. On the 30th of September 1955, James Dean was killed when his Porsche Spyder collided with another car on a California highway near Cholame. He was 24 years old, and had been a film star for barely 18 months. His body was returned to Indiana, and he is buried at Park Cemetery in Fairmount, the small farm town where he was raised. His grave is a modest stone, and while devoted fans do make the pilgrimage to rural Indiana, the eternal teenage rebel rests in a quiet country cemetery far from Hollywood, the flowers left by admirers the only sign that a legend lies beneath the plain marker. Burt Lancaster was the acrobatic, athletic star who became one of the finest and most intelligent actors of his generation. He was born in New York City in 1913 and began as a circus acrobat before his athletic grace and blazing smile made him a star in The Killers, From Here to Eternity, and Elmer Gantry, for which he won the Academy Award. He grew into a serious and adventurous actor, choosing challenging roles in Birdman of Alcatraz and The Leopard, and he was a committed political activist for civil rights and liberal causes. Burt Lancaster died in 1994 at 80, after a series of strokes had left him incapacitated for his final years. He was cremated, and his ashes were buried without ceremony at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, beneath a plot marked only by a small plaque with his name and dates, no epitaph, no flourish. The acrobat, who became one of cinema's great actors, chose the plainest possible resting place, easily overlooked in the celebrity cemetery, a quiet marker for a man who had commanded the screen with such physical force. The Marx Brothers were the greatest anarchic comedy team in film history, four brothers whose verbal and physical mayhem redefined screen comedy. They were born in New York City around the turn of the century, raised by an ambitious mother in a poor immigrant household, and Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo brought chaos to Duck Soup, A Night at the Opera, and Animal Crackers. Groucho's grease paint, mustache, and cigar became one of the most recognizable images in comedy. Their deaths were scattered across decades. Chico died in 1961, Harpo in 1964, Groucho in 1977, and Zeppo in 1979. And their resting places are scattered too. Several of the brothers were cremated. Groucho's ashes rest at Eden Memorial Park in Los Angeles, though his urn was reportedly once briefly stolen. Harpo was cremated with ashes scattered. The brothers, who were inseparable on screen, whose chaos delighted the world, are divided in death across different cemeteries and different fates. No single place where admirers can visit all of them together, the team broken apart at last. Buster Keaton was the great stone face, the silent comedian and filmmaker whose deadpan genius and death-defying stunts place him among the supreme artists of cinema. He was born in Kansas in 1895 and thrown around the stage as a child in his family's vaudeville act, learning to fall without being hurt. The General, Sherlock Jr., and Steamboat Bill Jr. reveal a filmmaker of astonishing invention, performing his own dangerous stunts without ever cracking a smile. His career was destroyed by sound and alcohol before he was rediscovered and celebrated late in life. Buster Keaton died in 1966 at 70, of lung cancer, never told he was dying, restless, and moving to the end. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, reportedly with a rosary in one pocket and a deck of cards in the other, prepared for either destination. His grave is a modest marker, visited by devoted film enthusiasts who understand his genius, but passed by the general public, the great stone face resting quietly in the Hollywood Hills. Sidney Poitier broke Hollywood's color barrier and became the first black actor to win the Academy Award for Best Actor, changing American film forever through the sheer dignity and power of his presence. He was born in Miami in 1927, prematurely, and raised in the Bahamas in poverty, and he taught himself to lose his accent and red before conquering Hollywood. The Defiant Ones, Lilies of the Field, which won him his historic Oscar, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner made him not just a star, but a symbol of a changing nation. He was later knighted and served as a diplomat for the Bahamas. Sidney Poitier died in 2022 at 94. His passing was mourned around the world as the loss of a genuine pioneer. In keeping with the privacy his family maintained, the details of his final resting place have been kept largely out of public view, and there is no thronged public grave, only the enormous and permanent legacy of a man who opened doors that could never again be closed. Robert Mitchum was the heavy-lidded, effortlessly cool anti-hero whose sleepy menace and unhurried authority made him one of the most distinctive presences in film noir and beyond. He was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in 1917, and lived a genuinely rough early life, riding the rails as a teenage hobo and even serving on a chain gang before drifting into acting almost by accident. Out of the Past, The Night of the Hunter, in which his preacher villain is one of cinema's great monsters, and Cape Fear showcased his unique blend of danger and calm. He cultivated an image of not caring, but he was a sharper and more sensitive artist than he let on. Robert Mitchum died in 1997 at 79, of lung cancer and emphysema. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea, off the coast, with no grave and no stone. The coolest man in the history of film noir left no monument at all, only the ocean and the long shadow of his performances. Edward G. Robinson was the definitive screen gangster. a small man with an enormous presence whose snarling menace concealed one of the gentlest and most cultured souls in Hollywood. He was born Emanuel Goldenberg in Bucharest, Romania, in 1893, and his family fled anti-Semitic violence for New York's Lower East Side. Little Caesar typecast him forever as a tough guy, but he brought depth and intelligence to Double Indemnity and Scarlet Street, and in private he was a passionate art collector who spoke many languages. His final film was Soylent Green, whose death scene he filmed knowing he was dying of cancer. Edward G. Robinson died in 1973 at 79, days after completing it, and was awarded an honorary Oscar posthumously. He is entombed at Beth Olam Mausoleum, the Jewish section of Hollywood Forever Cemetery. His crypt is quiet, passed by most visitors who come to Hollywood Forever for more glamorous names. The great screen gangster, gentle and cultured in life, resting in near silence in a corner of the famous cemetery. William Holden was the handsome, cynical, disillusioned leading man who embodied a certain hard-won American weariness across 3 decades of stardom. He was born in O'Fallon, Illinois, in 1918, and became a star in Sunset Boulevard, playing the doomed screenwriter, then won the Academy Award for Stalag 17, and gave one of his finest performances in Network. He was a serious conservationist who founded a wildlife preserve in Kenya, and he struggled for much of his life with alcoholism, which ultimately killed him. On his own, in his apartment in Santa Monica in 1981, William Holden fell, struck his head, and bled to death. He was not found for several days. He was 63. His death, alone and undiscovered, was one of the saddest ends of any star of his stature. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean, with no grave and no marker. The disillusioned hero of Sunset Boulevard died as alone as any character he ever played, and left no resting place behind but the sea. We turn now to the women AFI honored, beginning with the greatest female screen legend of all time. Katharine Hepburn was the fiercely independent, patrician New Englander who won 4 Academy Awards, more than any other performer, across a career of nearly 60 years. She was born in Hartford, Connecticut, in 1907, into a progressive and intellectual family, and she brought a spiky intelligence and unmistakable voice to the Philadelphia story, The African Queen, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and On Golden Pond. She lived life entirely on her own terms, wearing trousers when women did not, and she loved Spencer Tracy for 26 years. Katharine Hepburn died in 2003 at 96. She is buried in the Hepburn family plot at Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford, Connecticut, the city where she was born, far from Hollywood. She wanted to be with her family, not the industry. Her grave, in a New England cemetery, is dignified and quiet, and though admirers do come, the greatest actress in the history of American film rests among her relatives in the city she always considered home. Bette Davis was the fierce, uncompromising queen of Warner Brothers, an actress who fought the studio system and played difficult, unglamorous, even monstrous women when others would not. She was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, in 1908, and won 2 Academy Awards for Dangerous and Jezebel, with unforgettable performances in Now Voyager, All About Eve, and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Her enormous eyes and clipped diction were imitated for generations. Her personal life was turbulent, with 4 marriages and a bitter estrangement from her daughter, and she kept working through strokes and cancer with undiminished defiance. Bette Davis died in 1989 at 81 in France, returning from receiving an award despite her illness. She is entombed at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, in a sarcophagus overlooking the Warner Brothers studio where she made her greatest films. Her self-chosen epitaph reads, "She did it the hard way." Her grave is one of the more visited on this tour, drawn by that famous line, "The fighter resting above the studio she conquered." Audrey Hepburn was the luminous, elegant gamine who redefined beauty and grace and became one of the most beloved figures in film history. She was born in Belgium in 1929 and survived the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands as a starving child before conquering Hollywood in Roman Holiday, which won her the Academy Award, then Sabrina, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and My Fair Lady. She largely left acting to raise her children and, in her final years, to work tirelessly for UNICEF in the world's poorest places. Audrey Hepburn died in 1993 at 63 of cancer at her home in Switzerland. She is buried in the tiny village cemetery of Tolochenaz, on the shore of Lake Geneva, beneath a simple wooden cross, in a plot no grander than the farmers buried around her. The village asks visitors to be discreet, and they come quietly, one or two at a time. The most elegant woman in film history chose the humblest of graves, a plain cross in a Swiss village far from the world that adored her. Ingrid Bergman was the radiant, natural beauty from Sweden, whose warmth and vulnerability made her one of the most beloved actresses of the 1940s. She was born in Stockholm in 1915, orphaned young, and she brought a luminous sincerity to Casablanca, Gaslight, which won her the first of 3 Academy Awards, and Notorious. Her career in America was nearly destroyed when she left her husband for the Italian director Roberto Rossellini, a scandal that saw her denounced in the U.S. Senate before she triumphantly returned and won again. Ingrid Bergman died in 1982, on her 67th birthday, of breast cancer. She was cremated, and most of her ashes were scattered in the sea off the Swedish coast, near the island of Danholmen, where she had spent her happiest summers, though some were placed beside her parents in Stockholm. The luminous star of Casablanca rests mostly in the cold northern waters of her homeland, with no single grave for admirers to visit, only the Swedish sea she loved. Greta Garbo was the mysterious, unattainable Swedish goddess, whose face was called the most beautiful ever filmed, and whose retreat into total seclusion only deepened her legend. She was born in Stockholm in 1905, into poverty, and became the supreme icon of MGM in Flesh and the Devil, Anna Christie, Grand Hotel, Camille, and Ninotchka. At the height of her fame, in 1941, she simply walked away from film forever, and spent the next half-century as a recluse in New York, avoiding all publicity, the ultimate embodiment of the phrase misquoted from one of her films, "I want to be alone." Greta Garbo died in 1990 at 84. She was cremated, and after years in which her ashes remained unburied, they were finally interred in 1999 at Skogskyrkogården, a beautiful woodland cemetery outside Stockholm. Her grave, in the Swedish Forest Cemetery, is elegant and remote, fitting for a woman who spent her life fleeing the world's gaze, and even in death she rests far from Hollywood, alone at last as she always wished to be. Marilyn Monroe was, and remains, the most iconic sex symbol in the history of film, a vulnerable, luminous, tragic figure whose fame has only grown since her death. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen in Los Angeles in 1926, and endured a childhood of foster homes and an orphanage before becoming the biggest star in the world in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, The 7-Year Itch, and Some Like It Hot. Behind the dazzling image were profound struggles with mental illness, addiction, and the crushing weight of being desired by everyone and understood by no one. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in 1962 at 36, of a barbiturate overdose ruled probable suicide. She is entombed at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, in a simple wall crypt. For 20 years, Joe DiMaggio sent roses 3 times a week. Her crypt, unlike so many on this tour, is never lonely. It is worn smooth by countless hands, and always covered in flowers and lipstick kisses. The one legend here, whom the crowds have never stopped visiting. Elizabeth Taylor was the violet-eyed movie queen whose staggering beauty, turbulent romances, and genuine talent made her the last great star of the studio system. She was born in London in 1932, a child star in National Velvet, and grew into an actress of real power in A Place in the Sun, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, winning 2 Academy Awards. Her 8 marriages, twice to Richard Burton, and her later pioneering activism against AIDS made her one of the most famous women alive for over half a century. Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011 at 79 of heart failure. She is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Great Mausoleum, near Michael Jackson, her close friend. Ever the great entertainer, she reportedly instructed that her funeral begin 15 minutes late so that she could be late to her own funeral. Her grave, sealed within the largely inaccessible Great Mausoleum, cannot be visited by the public. The last studio queen resting behind marble walls her admirers cannot pass. Judy Garland was one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived, a performer of overwhelming emotional power whose life was shaped and ultimately destroyed by the studio that made her a child star. She was born Frances Gumm in Minnesota in 1922. and MGM worked her mercilessly and fed her pills, an addiction that haunted her whole life. The Wizard of Oz made her immortal, and A Star is Born and her legendary Carnegie Hall concert revealed the full depth of her genius. Judy Garland died in London in 1969 at 47 of an accidental overdose. She was first buried in New York, but in 2017 her remains were moved to Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, into a pavilion built for her, so her fans, many of them from the gay community for whom she is an icon, could reach her more easily. Her grave, after decades on the East Coast, is now among the more visited on this tour, the wandering star finally at rest, where those who love her most can come and thank her. Marlene Dietrich was the smoldering, androgynous German enchantress who became a Hollywood icon and a genuine hero of the war against the Nazis. She was born in Berlin in 1901, and the Blue Angel made her a star before Josef von Sternberg brought her to America for a series of exotic, sensual classics. She defied Hitler, became an American citizen, and spent the war years entertaining Allied troops at the front, one of the most courageous stars of her era. In her final decades, she became a recluse in her Paris apartment, refusing to be seen. Marlene Dietrich died in Paris in 1992 at 90. Her body was returned to Berlin, the city of her birth, which she had fled from Nazism, and she was buried at the Friedhof Stubenrauchstrasse cemetery, near her mother. Her return to Berlin was controversial, as some Germans had never forgiven her for opposing the Nazis. But her grave in her home city is now honored, quiet beneath the trees, the anti-fascist icon, home at last. Joan Crawford was the ultimate Hollywood survivor, a shopgirl who reinvented herself again and again across 50 years, from flapper to melodrama queen to horror star. She was born in Texas around 1904, escaped a childhood of poverty and abuse, and won the Academy Award for Mildred Pierce, with unforgettable turns in The Women and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Her image was permanently altered after her death by her daughter's memoir, Mommy Dearest, which portrayed her as an abusive monster, a portrait that has overshadowed her genuine achievements. Joan Crawford died in 1977 in New York, in her early 70s, having grown reclusive and religious. She was cremated, and her ashes were interred at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, beside her fourth husband. Her crypt is quiet and rarely visited. The great survivor remembered now more for a hostile book than for her 50 years of stardom, resting in a New York mausoleum far from the Hollywood she conquered and outlasted for so long. Barbara Stanwyck was the tough, versatile, supremely professional actress who could master any genre, from screwball comedy to noir to western, and who was beloved by every crew she ever worked with. She was born Ruby Stevens in Brooklyn in 1907, orphaned young and raised in foster homes, and she brought a hard-edged intelligence to The Lady Eve, Double Indemnity, in which her murderous femme fatale is one of noir's greatest creations, and Stella Dallas. She never won a competitive Oscar, one of the great injustices of Academy history, though she received an honorary one. Barbara Stanwyck died in 1990 at 82 of heart failure. She was cremated, and her ashes were scattered from a helicopter over Lone Pine, California, in the Alabama hills where she had filmed so many of her westerns, with no grave and no marker. The tough, beloved professional chose to be scattered over the rugged western landscape she loved, leaving no monument, only the mountains and the films. Claudette Colbert was the sparkling, sophisticated queen of screwball comedy, a French-born actress whose impeccable timing and charm made her one of the highest-paid stars of the 1930s. She was born in Paris in 1903 and came to New York as a child. It Happened One Night, opposite Clark Gable, won her the Academy Award and became one of the most beloved comedies ever made, and she shone in The Palm Beach Story and Midnight. Famously insistent on being filmed only from her left side, she was a consummate professional who protected her image with iron discipline. In her later years, she retired to her beloved estate in Barbados. Claudette Colbert died there in 1996 at 92 after a series of strokes. She was buried at Parish Church of St. Peter's Cemetery in Barbados. On the Caribbean island she had made her home, beside her mother and her second husband. The queen of screwball comedy rests thousands of miles from Hollywood, in a churchyard on a tropical island, a resting place almost no American admirer will ever visit. Grace Kelly was the cool, elegant blonde who rose to the height of Hollywood stardom and then left it all to become a real princess. She was born in Philadelphia in 1929 into a wealthy family, and in just 5 years, she won an Academy Award for The Country Girl and starred in Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, and High Noon, before retiring at 26 to marry Prince Rainier III of Monaco. She spent the rest of her life as Princess Grace, a role as scrutinized as any she played on screen. On the 13th of September 1982, Grace Kelly suffered a stroke while driving on a mountain road in Monaco, and her car plunged down a steep hillside. She died the following day at 52. She is buried in the Grimaldi family vault in the Cathedral of Our Lady Immaculate in Monaco. Her tomb, in the Monégasque Cathedral, draws visitors who come to the principality. But far from Hollywood, the American girl who became a princess rests among the royal family she married into, a world away from the movies. Ginger Rogers was Fred Astaire's incomparable dancing partner, the woman who, as the saying goes, did everything he did backwards and in high heels, and a fine dramatic and comic actress in her own right. She was born in Missouri in 1911, and her partnership with Astaire in Top Hat, Swing Time, and Shall We Dance produced some of the most magical sequences in film history. She also won the Academy Award on her own for the drama Kitty Foyle, proving she was far more than half of a dance team. Ginger Rogers died in 1995 at 83 of heart failure. She is buried at Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth, California, in the San Fernando Valley, the same cemetery where her partner Fred Astaire also rests, though in a separate plot. It is a quiet irony that the two greatest dance partners in film history lie in the same valley cemetery, near one another yet apart. Both of their graves passed by the visitors who never realize the legends are there. Mae West was the outrageous, wisecracking sex symbol who wrote her own risque material and became one of the most subversive and enduring figures in American entertainment. She was born in Brooklyn in 1893 and was a scandalous Broadway star, even jailed briefly for an obscenity charge, before conquering Hollywood in She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel, her innuendo-laden one-liners becoming legendary. She controlled her own image and career with a shrewdness rare for any star, let alone a woman, and she performed into her 80s. Mae West died in 1980 at 87 after a series of strokes. She is entombed at Cypress Hills Abbey, in the Cypress Hills Cemetery in Brooklyn, the borough of her birth, in the family mausoleum alongside her parents and siblings. The great sex symbol, who spent her life in Hollywood glamour, chose to return in death to Brooklyn, resting in a family vault in the New York borough where she began, far from the film capital she once ruled. Vivien Leigh gave two of the most celebrated performances in film history and won 2 Academy Awards, her fragile beauty masking a lifelong battle with mental illness. She was born in India in 1913, and her Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind and Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire remain benchmarks of screen acting. Her tempestuous marriage to Laurence Olivier was one of the theater's great romances and tragedies, strained by her bipolar disorder and her tuberculosis. Vivien Leigh died in London in 1967 at 53 of tuberculosis, found on the floor of her flat. She was cremated, and her ashes were scattered on the lake at her beloved country home, Tickeridge Mill, in East Sussex, England, according to her wishes. There is no grave, no stone, only the water at the country retreat where she had found some measure of peace. The woman who gave us Scarlett and Blanche left no monument. Her ashes committed to an English lake, remembered only through 2 immortal performances. Lillian Gish was the first great actress of the cinema, the ethereal star of the silent era, whose career spanned an astonishing 75 years, from the earliest days of film to nearly its centennial. She was born in Ohio in 1893, and her collaborations with director D.W. Griffith in The Birth of a Nation and Broken Blossoms helped establish film as an art form, her delicate, expressive performances setting the standard for screen acting. She worked into her 90s, a living bridge between the birth of movies and the modern age. Lillian Gish died in 1993, at 99, in her sleep in New York. She was entombed at St. Bartholomew's Church in Manhattan, in the columbarium of the Episcopal Church, beside her sister Dorothy, also an actress. Her resting place, within a church on Park Avenue, is quiet and little known. And the first lady of the silent screen, who saw the entire history of film unfold, rests in near anonymity in the heart of the city, her 75-year career all but forgotten by passers-by. Shirley Temple was the most popular star in the world in the depths of the Great Depression, a curly-haired child whose singing, dancing, and irrepressible optimism lifted the spirits of a suffering nation. She was born in Santa Monica in 1928, and by the age of 6, she was a genuine phenomenon. In Bright Eyes, Curly Top, and Heidi, awarded a special juvenile Oscar and outdrawing every adult star. She retired from film as a young woman and reinvented herself entirely as a diplomat, serving as a United States ambassador to Ghana and Czechoslovakia, a remarkable second act. Shirley Temple died in 2014 at 85, surrounded by family. She is buried at Alta Mesa Memorial Park in Palo Alto, California, in the northern part of the state, far from Hollywood. Her grave, in a Bay Area cemetery, is quiet and dignified, and the little girl who was once the biggest star on Earth and who became a serious stateswoman rests peacefully in Northern California, far from the studios where she once saved an entire industry. Rita Hayworth was the love goddess of the 1940s, the dazzling star of Gilda whose glamour concealed a shy, insecure woman, and whose final years were a long, cruel descent into illness. She was born Margarita Cancino in Brooklyn in 1918, and the studio remade her completely, even altering her hairline through painful electrolysis. Gilda, CoverGirl, and The Lady from Shanghai made her an icon of desire, and she married 5 times, including Orson Welles and a real prince. In her later years, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, one of the first public figures known to suffer from it, and she lost her words and her memories long before her death. Rita Hayworth died in 1987 at 68. She is buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, beneath a marker reading, "To yesterday's companionship and tomorrow's reunion." Her grave is quiet, and the love goddess who was never allowed to be herself, whose mind was erased by disease, rests in the Catholic cemetery, remembered for a glamour that was never really who she was. Lauren Bacall was the sultry, husky-voiced beauty who became a star at 19 and spent a lifetime as Hollywood royalty. She was born Betty Persky in the Bronx in 1924, and her debut opposite Humphrey Bogart in To Have and Have Not, with the famous line about whistling, made her an instant icon and the love of Bogart's life. To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, and Key Largo cemented the legendary Bogey and Bacall partnership, and after his death she built a distinguished second career on stage, winning Tony Awards. Lauren Bacall died in 2014 at 89, of a stroke. She was cremated, and her ashes were interred at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, the borough of her birth. Bogart's ashes rest across the country in California, so the legendary couple, inseparable in the movies, are divided in death by 3,000 miles. Bacall rests in a quiet New York cemetery, returned to the Bronx where she began, far from the Hollywood soundstages where she first captivated the world at 19. Sophia Loren is the magnificent Italian star, the earthy, voluptuous beauty who rose from wartime poverty near Naples to become an international icon and the first performer to win an Academy Award for a foreign-language film. She was born in Rome in 1934 and raised in hardship during the Second World War, and she brought a natural warmth and force to Two Women, which won her that historic Oscar, and to a series of classics opposite Marcello Mastroianni. She married the producer Carlo Ponti and became one of the most beloved and enduring figures in world cinema. Sophia Loren is, at the time of this recording, still living, one of the last surviving legends from AFI's list, in her late 80s and residing in Europe. She has no grave to visit, because she is happily still with us, a living link to the golden age of both Hollywood and Italian cinema, and the only figure on this entire tour whose story is not yet finished and whom we hope to celebrate for many more years to come. Jean Harlow was the original blonde bombshell, the platinum sex symbol whose comedic gifts and warmth made her one of the biggest stars of the early 1930s. Before her shocking death at just 26, she was born Harlan Carpenter in Kansas City in 1911, pushed into films by an ambitious mother, and her platinum hair became a national sensation. Red Dust, Dinner at 8, and Bombshell revealed a natural comic talent beyond the sex symbol image. Her life was marked by tragedy, including the suicide of her second husband, and then by her own sudden illness. Jean Harlow died in 1937, at 26, of kidney failure, while filming Saratoga. Her heartbroken fiancé, William Powell, paid for her crypt at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Great Mausoleum, in a private walled sanctuary. But that section is closed to the public, so the original blonde bombshell, dead at 26, rests sealed away behind marble that her admirers can never reach. One of the most beautiful and most inaccessible graves in all of Hollywood. Carole Lombard was the luminous, madcap queen of screwball comedy, a beautiful and beloved star whose warmth and irreverent humor made her adored by the entire industry, and whose death was one of Hollywood's great tragedies. She was born in Indiana in 1908, and became the highest-paid star in Hollywood, brilliant in My Man Godfrey, 20th Century, and To Be or Not to Be. She married Clark Gable in one of the great Hollywood romances, a genuine love match between two down-to-earth people. On the 16th of January 1942, returning from a war bond rally, Carole Lombard's plane crashed into a mountain near Las Vegas, killing everyone aboard. She was 33, the first Hollywood star to die in service of the war effort. She is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Great Mausoleum, and Clark Gable, who was shattered by her death, chose to be buried beside her 18 years later. But the Great Mausoleum is closed to the public, so the beloved Carole Lombard rests, with the King of Hollywood at her side, behind walls no admirer can pass. Mary Pickford was America's sweetheart, the most powerful woman in the history of the film industry, a superstar who was also a shrewd businesswoman and co-founder of a major studio. She was born in Toronto in 1892, and her golden curls and spirited performances made her the most beloved and highest-paid star of the silent era in films like Pollyanna and Coquette, which won her an Academy Award. Far more than an actress, she co-founded United Artists with Chaplin, Fairbanks, and Griffith, wielding unprecedented control over her own career and the industry itself. In her later years, she became a recluse at Pickfair, the legendary mansion she had shared with Douglas Fairbanks. Mary Pickford died in 1979 at 87. She is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Garden of Memory, a private and gated section closed to the general public. So America's sweetheart, the woman who helped build Hollywood itself, and ruled it as few ever have, rests behind a locked gate, her grave unreachable by the public who once adored her above all others. Ava Gardner was the ravishing, earthy beauty from rural North Carolina who became one of the most glamorous and desired stars of the 1940s and 1950s, a barefoot country girl who conquered Hollywood on her own terms. She was born in 1922, the daughter of poor tobacco farmers, and her stunning looks made her a star in The Killers, Mogambo, and The Barefoot Contessa. She married 3 times, including Mickey Rooney and Frank Sinatra, whose love for her endured long after their divorce. Restless and independent, she spent her later years in London, having tired of Hollywood. Ava Gardner died in London in 1990 at 67, of pneumonia. Her body was returned home to North Carolina, and she is buried at Sunset Memorial Park in Smithfield, the small town near where she was born, in the family plot beside her parents. The glamorous, international star chose to return in death to the rural North Carolina of her childhood, resting in a small-town cemetery among her family, far from Hollywood, London, and the glittering world she had known. 50 legends, 50 resting places, or in many cases, no resting place at all. Some lie beneath grand monuments in famous cemeteries. Some are sealed behind the marble walls of mausoleums their admirers can never enter, like Gable and Lombard and Harlow and Elizabeth Taylor in the Great Mausoleum. Some chose the humblest of graves, like Audrey Hepburn's wooden cross in a Swiss village. Some returned home to the small towns where they began, like Ava Gardner in North Carolina and James Cagney in the New York countryside. And a remarkable number left no grave at all, their ashes scattered to the sea or the desert or a distant lake. Cary Grant, Henry Fonda, Gene Kelly, Robert Mitchum, William Holden, Barbara Stanwyck, Vivien Leigh, Marlon Brando in Tahiti and Death Valley, Orson Welles in a well on a Spanish farm. What connects them is not the grandeur of their graves. It is that every one of them was, for a time, the most luminous thing in the world. Their faces filled the screens of every town in America. People lined up in the rain to see them, and now most of them rest in silence, in places the crowds no longer come, or in no place at all. Only a few still draw the flowers. Marilyn Monroe, worn smooth by countless hands. Judy Garland, moved across the country so her fans could reach her. Bette Davis, above the studio she conquered. The rest have slipped, slowly, into the quiet that claims us all, famous and forgotten alike. What we can do, tonight and every night, is remember them. Watch their films, say their names, Think of the specific ground where each of them lies, or the sea or the sky that holds them now. It costs us nothing. And it is the one thing we can still offer the people who gave us so much light. They gave us their faces, their voices, their whole brief, brilliant lives. The least we can do is not forget where they are. Thank you for walking with me. Rest well. And if you pass a cemetery in the coming week, and you have a moment, stop and read a name, any name. Someone was loved, once, who is buried there. It costs us nothing, and it may be the only thing that keeps any of us from disappearing entirely. Good night, friends.